Hey there, people. Last time we created an authorized socket IO event and handler to remove a participant from the poll. Today, we're going to be working on creating events and handlers for adding and removing nominations. A nomination is a candidate for the answer to a poll. So for example, if the poll's topic is where should we go out for dinner, and the nomination might be something like the Turkish restaurant or the Mexican restaurant. I'm not going to lie, I'd have a hard time voting between a Turkish and Mexican restaurant right now. I'm clearly hungry. To get all of this done, we need to add some new repository methods to add nominations to our poll in Redis, and we need to add accompanying service methods. If I recall, the service methods should be rather straightforward for nominations today, but we'll see. As a reminder, you can always get the code for this course by going to my repository, looking for the branch of the last tutorial. So this is tutorial 14, so you can get the branch for 13 to follow along today, and there are some getting started instructions just in case you need them. All right, so I have our application up and running in a terminal. And before creating some repository methods to add and remove nominations, I want to define the necessary types for this. Let's first define the payload we'll use in an add nomination, and we're going to do that in the polls folder under types.typescript. And remember that when we worked with repository types, as you can see in this comment, we are adding a suffix of data to let it know it's working with the repository layer. We're going to call this type add nomination data. It will take a poll ID, a nomination ID, and an actual nomination. Now, this nomination we're actually going to define in the shared package. So remember, we're using npm workspaces. So we have this server folder, and then we have a shared folder that holds some poll types that will be common among our server and our client React application, which we have yet to begin. Here we are in poll types, so let's go ahead and add that nomination type. We'll do that beneath the participants here. And so our nomination, each individual nomination will store the user ID who made the suggestion or the nomination, as well as the text or the description of the nomination, which if it were, where do you want to go out to eat, it might be McDonald's. Then we will store nominations or multiple nominations as an object where we're mapping an ID, which is a string, to each of these nominations. Then in our poll, we need to uncomment these nominations of type nominations, as we'll now be adding them to the repository. And our Redis database basically stores our poll in the shape of data shown in this interface. And also, let's make this a type. I think I did this in my notes. Yeah, let's make everything a type. So this will be export type participants equal and export type poll equals. And let's get rid of a space and we're good to go. And also, let's do that in this file types. Let's also get rid of any interfaces. In fact, I don't even think this one needs to be used anymore. And that is wrong, but let's also make all of these types. This is still used as far as my knowledge goes. And so we'll say export type. And let's see if there's anything else that's still an interface. I was getting away from that. It would still work. It's not a big deal. They're very similar. So let's say type equals, and I think this is just legacy from what I had before. It wants me to add semicolon, type. All right, good. And then let's import this nomination from the shared folder poll types. Okay, so with our poll types updated and our add nomination argument type defined, let's create the add nomination method in polls and polls repository.typescript. Upon opening the file, you will see that we have a little red squiggly line here, or an error. And if I pop open the terminal, you can see we have a problem. And so that is that properties nomination is now missing from our poll type. And that is from when we create this initial poll, we're expecting to return a poll, right? So we return a poll here, or the initially created poll, but it does not have nominations. So we can just do that by adding a nominations as an empty object here. And do recall that nominations will store a nomination ID and then a nomination as the value to that nomination ID key. We'll then create or add an add nomination method, maybe beneath all this remove participant here. Let's make sure I got the brackets right. Yep. So to add a nomination, we'll receive a payload of poll ID, nomination ID, and a nomination. And let's import this add nomination data. That's a type we just created. And then we'll just log that we are attempting to add this nomination to a particular poll ID. We'll get the polls key as we have many times before. This is the base key of the sort of poll object in Redis using redis-json. And then we want to access the nominations path at the key nomination ID, and then we want to set the nomination with the actual nomination body. And of course, we have to stringify that to pass it to Redis or redis-json. And then we're going to use our getPoll method that's already here inside of this class. So we have getPoll, and that will just return the current state of the poll for us. And then if any of these methods fail, we'll say that we failed to add a nomination ID to the poll, and then we'll throw this as an internal server error exception. Now, I maybe could have returned or thrown a separate internal error exception if we failed to set JSON set versus JSON get with this method, but I'm happy enough with this. You might want to add more advanced error handling. Let's now add a similar method to remove a nomination. And this one will not take an object. It will just accept a poll ID as a string and a nomination ID. We'll access that same nominations object with a key and a path. And then we'll use the JSON delete command to get the nomination ID and remove the value at that key. And again, we'll also log and throw an internal server error exception if we have any issue there. Now, one other thing I want to do to be consistent is actually throw internal server errors in other places. And one of them would be get poll and add participant. So let's go to get poll, should be pretty far up here, get poll. It's this one, no, that's create poll. Here's get poll. And so instead of just throwing the error, I want to throw an internal server error here. And this will just have a message of failed to get poll ID. And the next one will be in this add participant. And it's probably fine if you use the default 500 error handling of Nest.js, but to be consistent, we'll throw internal server error exceptions here. We're now going to add some accompanying service methods. And before doing that, we're going to need to add a type for the payload received by the service method. So we'll go back to types here, and we're going to add an add nomination fields to these service types, which are commented here. So let's go and add nomination fields here. And I guess this data, I'll move this also for formatting down to the data section. I guess I got that wrong in the last tutorial, but anyway, we just added an add nomination fields here. And it looks like actually we weren't using this remove participant data, and so let's go ahead and delete it. And I'm just going to check to make sure we weren't using that. And yeah, I only had it in one of my markdown tutorials. I should probably edit that since it's wrong, but it no longer is used. Back in our polls repository, I noticed I just had an error. Probably not necessary to fix this in the video, but I think I'm missing a bracket or a brace somewhere. And there it is. Okay, back into the poll service, since we've just added an add nominations field, we can create our first method to add a nomination. Now, before doing this, I want to import another ID creator from a source file that I created before we did this project, but I'll show you what we have. It's pretty straightforward. And actually, let me close this. And the one method we're going to import now is going to be create nomination ID. And if we command and click look at this in this IDs.TypeScript, it's just going to create an 8-character nano ID. Go ahead and check out this package online if you need to know how it works. Let's now scroll down and add the add nomination method. Let's add it beneath get poll. And so this will basically take a poll ID, user ID, and the text of the nomination, which would be like the restaurant name. And let's import that type. And it will return a poll. So then we're just going to reach out and call add nomination. And then we're going to actually create the nomination ID in the service. We could probably create it at the database level. I don't know if you could do that in Redis. We could also create the nomination ID in the repository layer in some cases, but I'm just going to create it here from the service layer. Let's now add the remove nomination method. And this one's going to be even simpler. And this one just takes the poll ID and nomination IDs as strings and calls the polls repository remove nomination. Not a lot of application logic to this one. Let's now move on to our polls gateway to receive socket events. We're going to accept a nomination event that will allow nominations from any user who's authorized to a particular poll. And if a user is able to connect and then join a room for a particular poll, they are authorized. However, we're going to restrict removing nominations to the admin of a particular poll via the authorization guard that we created in the last tutorial. So let's open up polls.gateway.typescript and let's add a message called nominate. Maybe I should have said let's add a message handler for the nominate message. And so we're going to nominate with a message body that we'll define shortly. And so we're going to have an incoming JSON object that will be defined and validated via a nomination DTO object we'll create. We created a long time ago a socket with the auth data. And then we're just going to say that we're attempting to add a nomination for that user. And then we'll call that add nomination method we just created, which returns the full updated poll, which we will emit via our poll updated event to all of the clients connected to a particular room or poll. Now, this actual nomination DTO is just going to be the text of the nomination. So in the example of which restaurant should we go to, this would be the name of the restaurant, and we can add it in DTOs. And this is actually just going to be a single field, so I almost feel dumb for adding it. And what will this single field in the class be? It will be the text, and we're just going to make sure that it has a length between 1 and 100 characters. Let's then go back to polls gateway and import this. Let's now add our admin only event handler for removing nominations. So this method will be decorated with the event name remove_nomination, and we'll use that gateway admin guard which we created in the last tutorial. Now to remove a nomination, we're merely going to pass an ID as a string. Now when you say message body and then pass a key, that would pick off like the ID field of a JSON object, and we'll see that shortly. We get access to the client, and then we're just going to call the poll service remove nomination method with the poll ID, which is extracted from that authorized client, and a nomination ID, which is passed from the client. Then we'll emit the updated poll to all of the users connected to this room by using toClient.pollID. All right, so it's time to test this out in Postman, and I think I have an unused import in the gateway, so let's just remove that. I don't remember what that is from. Hopefully it's okay to remove it though. And our application is running just so you can see that. So in Postman, first we're going to post to create poll. And I'm sorry, Postman's not good for increased font size. There's just a lot of windows and text and organization. But anyway, let's create a poll and we'll say what to do today. And each voter can get 5 votes. That doesn't matter really yet. So player 1 created the poll, and then we'll join this poll with player 2. All right, so that's good. Then I want to go to the socket for player 1, and remember this player has a header with token 1, which was returned when they created the poll, and so we'll connect this client. and you can see they have connected, and you see they get the poll updated, the first version of the full poll, and then we'll do the same with the second client. I've opened Redis Insight, and let's just check out the poll and see that it has our participants. Cool. Now I want to mention that I've already been working in Postman, and so what I did for each of these clients is I went and I composed a new message here. So I created a message, and then I saved it as nominate and remove nomination. So we're in client 1 here. You can actually see the title here, and you can see that I created text shawarma shack. I guess I previously thought this poll was what restaurant should we go to, but good enough. We'll nominate shawarma shack, and we pass it as the text field. But before we do that, let's actually try passing an empty string. And so let's nominate nothing. Great, we got an exception, and it's a bad request exception, and it's the validation one. So this has an array of validation errors, and it says text must be longer or equal to 1 character, and that is from our nomination DTO. And if you recall, some time ago, we actually added in the exceptions folder a catch-all filter to convert the bad request exception that's HTTP and convert it into a WebSocket bad request exception. So this shows that that's working by sending us a WebSocket message of type bad request and then the message array. But let's go back and actually nominate Shawarma Shack. And we get a new message returned showing the poll has been updated. And you see we have a nomination with an 8-character nomination ID, this user's ID, and the text Shawarma Shack. Let's go to socket 2. Let's also nominate. And to create a new one, you just click compose message, and then there will be a little save option to save it here. And so you name the message type here, nominate, and the body as JSON. And in case I didn't show you, you click this to change the body type from text, binary, or JSON. So let's nominate Taco Town. Great SNL sketch, Taco Town. Check it out. So the poll has been updated now, and we have 2 nominations. One for this nomination with this user's ID and Taco Town, and the Shawarma Shack. And hopefully this user also received that new poll updated event because it's going to all clients connected to a room. And let's make this a little bigger. Nominations. Yep, it has both. And if we refresh our Redis, we should see these nominations as well that look just like the event we received. And isn't that swell? Everything seems to be working just fine. Now let's try to remove a nomination. So remember, we removed the nomination by passing this ID in the body of the payload to the remove nomination event. So I copied that. Now in Postman, let's try to remove nomination with client 2, who is not the admin. Remember, client 1, this one is the one who created the poll. So let's go here and try to remove nomination. We will pass the ID in a JSON payload. And let's see the message. Great, we have an unauthorized exception, which is just what we want, saying admin privileges required. Swell. Well, ain't that swell? All right, so then back here, we'll try to remove a nomination as well. And I'll change the screen size. And this person is the admin. So this should hopefully work. And you see the poll updated was received. And hopefully there's only a single nomination there. Let's confirm that there's only 1 nomination left in Redis. And it still seems to be showing that nomination, which is interesting because the log from the polls repository, and this is coming from get poll, you see it says it's from the polls repository, is showing a single nomination here. So I'll look that up and see what I can find. So to be honest, I don't really know what went wrong. I actually just backed out of the database and re-entered it, and the nominations were gone. So maybe there was a little bug with the refresh button. So I hope that's the case. Anyhow, next time we'll work on some of our last events. Maybe we'll have 2 more tutorials on the back end, And for those of you who like React more, finally your time is coming. All right, see you then. Take care.